Greetings. Okay. Greetings. Father Mark signing on, continuing the course on modern papacy, picking up with this is the third installment in the section on Pope John the 23rd. So, commencing where we left off. November 21st, 1962. No, wait. I did that already. November 26th. November 26th, 1962. Was the introduction of another draft schema or outline for a document on the Church, De Ecclesiae Unitate. As well, it's what the on the unity of the Church is what the draft was. So on ecclesiology, the theology of church. The schema was comprised 11 chapters, 82 pages of text. Everyone was quivering with nervous exhaustion. And watch the previous session to understand why. When Cardinal Ottaviani rose to introduce the draft schema from the Theological Commission, his words revealed how deeply betrayed he and the Ultramontanes and the traditionalists felt by Pope John's intervention 5 days earlier in the to overrule, to pull the draft that Ottaviani had presented on divine revelation, even though the cloture vote failed. So these are Ottaviani's words, quote, "I expect to hear the usual litany from the fathers of this council. It's academic, it's not pastoral, it's not ecumenical, it's negative, the other things like that. Further, I'll tell you what I really think. I believe that I and the Speaker for the Commission are wasting our words because the outcome has already been decided. Those whose constant cry is, 'Take it away, give us a new schema,' are now ready to open fire. I'll tell you something you may not know. Even before this schema was distributed, an alternative schema had already been produced. Yes, even before the merits of this schema have been looked at, the jury has rendered its verdict. I have no choice now but to say no more, because, as Scripture teaches, when nobody is listening, words are a waste of time." Ottaviani was only wrong in using the singular. Actually, multiple alternate schemae had been circulated. Nevertheless, when Ottaviani sat down, the formal presentation of the draft on behalf of his commission, the Theological Commission, was made by Bishop Fran Franich of the split Marakaska diocese, which then was in Yugoslavia, now it's in Croatia. What followed his presentation was a repetition of the antipathy that had plagued the two previous drafts. This time it was Cardinal Sunens who obtained a private meeting with the Pope. The result he presented to the Council on December 4th, 1962. Cardinal Sunens' intervention, which means his public speech, on the draft of the document about the Church. Sunens composed his comments after speaking to Pope John. He showed them to Pope John before he went public. Then he arranged a meeting at the Belgian College in Rome among like-minded, those self-identified progressives. At the meeting, those attending the meeting included Cardinal Montini, who was the next pope, future Pope Paul VI. So after that, in his intervention, his public speech on December 4th, Sunens proposed a central theme that would shape the rest of the Council's discussions and documents. The theme being Christ's Church, Light of the Nations. Ecclesia Christi, Lumen Christi. This, he went on, had two parts. Part one, the inner reality of the church, namely, what does the church say to itself and of itself? Second, the relationship of the church to the world outside. So ad intra et ad extra, to the inner and to the outer. Synod's address was greeted with a standing ovation by a majority of the Council Fathers. There was no vote on the draft schema of the church presented by Ottaviani, but its contents would later be dissected and reassembled into multiple documents, Lumen Christi, Gaudium et Spes, as well as the documents on ecumenism and religious freedom. So at least from this, what I just summarized, that at least four documents, the substance of at least four documents, emanated. December 6th, 1962, Pope John XXIII announced the creation of a coordinating commission to guide the future sessions of the Council, in accord with a suggestion made by Sunans at their earlier private meeting. However, now this was, obviously to address some of the management administrative chaos that was going on. However, all of the other management groups continue to exist. So the effect did not result in the streamlining for which it was intended. For example, the president of this coordinating commission, this new coordinating commission, was Cardinal Amleto Cicognani, the Secretary of State. And while being president of this new coordinating commission, he also retained his curial position, his ordinary position as Secretary of State, and he retained his conciliar governing position as president of the Secretariat of Extraordinary Affairs. That was one of the three management bodies created at the beginning. And Cicognani continued the documentary continued working on the document for the Commission on Oriental Churches, Eastern Churches. Pope John named 6 other members to the coordinating commission. Dopfner, who was German, Leinart, we've already met, Spellman, an American, Archbishop of New York, Sunans, we've met, a Belgian, Urbani, Italian, Carlo Confalonieri, also Italian. For the most part, these guys were all self-identified progressives, in the sense that they shared John's vision of the council as opening to the world by using language in a way that Vatican I and previous condemnations of modernism had not. So they all shared his ecclesiology, his vision of the church as being that the church functions best by joining the world, participating with the world and converting it from within. The first formal period of the council ended on December 8th, 1962, without having produced a single document. Not one. All that work I summarized over the last 2 sessions. Not a single document. Some assumed, and others hoped, that this farcical failure would end the council, relegating it to an anecdote of humorous bungling by a good-hearted, well-intentioned, but old and naive in the thought of some pontiff. But that's not how it ended. While no documents were produced in this period, the council had fundamentally realigned itself. It would not be a projection of ultramontane ecclesiology that Vatican I had been. Those council fathers who lived outside of Rome and returned home after December 8th would never see Pope John again. January 1963, the January 21st through 27th. The coordinating commission of the council did accomplish, finally, a necessary abridgment of the 70 schemata with which the council began, reducing the number to 17, so that the outlines for 17 documents. These served as the basis for what turned out to be the final product was 16 documents. The documents on Scripture and the sources of divine revelation, originally two separate schema, were later combined into one, Dei Verbum. And Schema 17, which had been tentatively titled The Presence of the Church in the Modern World, on January 27th, became Gaudium et Spes. It was just changed to was the document on the church in the modern world. A salient development, often referred to but seldom expounded in detail, is the role of the periti, the experts, in this documentary winnowing process, and in bringing the surviving schema into final text form. Periti were, of course, present from the beginning, yet the time pressure on bishops, and many of these guys had their own dioceses in other countries or continents, they had to rely on these theological professionals. As a result, the final text reflected developments in the fields of those academic professionals to a far greater extent than was the case at Vatican I or at Trent, where the final products were doctrinal, canonical, and legal text. So Vatican II is going to be very different. So a few examples. Monsignor Gerard Phillips was a priest of the Diocese of Liège, and he was a senator for the CVP, which was then, the Flemish Christian Democratic Party. So as a member of a political party. No, he was a priest also. So Monsignor Phillips obtained his doctorate from the Gregorian University in Rome, and immediately after his professorship, professorship at the minor seminary and at the major seminary in Liège, he became professor of dogmatic theology at Louvain Theological Faculty, which is a university in Belgium. During the conciliar period, from 1959, he was a member of the Preparatory Theological Commission and was later nominated an official peritus for the Doctrinal Commission, to which he was appointed vice secretary in 1963. Another example, Monsignor Arthur Janssen, Janssen. He was a priest of the Archdiocese of Mechelen-Brussels, Belgium, was a professor of moral theology at Louvain, the theological faculty in Belgium, from 1918 to 1959. During the council preparations, started in 1959, he was a consultor of the Preparatory Theological Commission. Another example, Jean Danilou, D-A-N-I-E-L-O-U. He joined the, it's French, because he joined the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, in 1929. He taught at one of the Jesuit schools in Poitiers, France, 1934 to 36. Subsequently, did advanced studies at Fourvière in Lyon under Henri de Lubac, whom I think we're going to meet again. And de Lubac introduced him to patristics, to the study of the Fathers of the Church. Danilou was ordained a priest on August 20th, 1938. During World War II, Danilou served with the Air Force, the French Air Force, in 1939 and 40. After the fall of France to the Nazis, he was demobilized and returned to civilian life. So he completed his doctoral dissertation on the spirituality of St. Gregory of Nyssa, one of the Cappadocian fathers whom we met in the patristics course. He received his doctorate in theology in 1942. At that time, he was appointed as a chaplain to the female section, the ladies section of a school in the École Normale Supérieure. It's an upper school for to train teachers, specifically a teacher school. He then began full-time research in the field of patristics and became one of the founders of the Sources Chrétiennes collection. That's the French translation of the Fathers. In 1944, Danielou was named professor of early Christian history at the Institut Catholique in Paris, and later became dean of that same institution. In 1960, at the request of Pope John XXIII, he served as a peritus at the Second Vatican Council. He subsequently was named a bishop by Pope Paul VI in 1969. He was consecrated in Paris in 1969, and then April 19th, and then a week later, on April 28th, he was named a cardinal by Pope Paul VI. Another example, Henri de Lubac. So Henri is Henry, French for Henry, then D-E, then Lubac, de Lubac, L-U-B-A-C. Born in Cambrai, France, one of 6 children. His father was a banker. His mother was a homemaker. De Lubac studied law for a year before, at age 17, joining the Society of Jesus in Lyon, 1913. A year later, he was drafted into the French army, 1914, due to the outbreak of World War I. He suffered a head wound at one of the battles on All Saints' Day, 1917, Les Esparres, at the Battle of Les Esparres. And it would give him episodes of recurring dizziness and headaches for the rest of his life. Following demobilization in 1919, de Lubac returned to the Jesuits, continued his studies, until priestly ordination on August 22, 1927. In 1929, de Lubac was appointed professor of fundamental theology at the Catholic University of Lyon, where he taught from 1929 to 1961, with 2 interruptions. One interruption during World War II, when he was forced underground because of his activities with the French resistance. And again from 1950 to 58, when the Jesuits removed him from his teaching responsibilities owing to questions of his orthodoxy. In August of 1960, Pope John XXIII appointed de Lubac as a consultant to the Preparatory Theological Commission for Vatican II. He was then made a peritus to the council itself, and later Pope Paul VI named him a member of its theological commission, as well as appointed him to 2 of the secretariats. De Lubac's influence on the document Lumen Gentium, on the Church, and on the dogmatic constitution of the Church, as well as Gaudium et Spes on the Church in the modern world, is widely recognized. In 1983, Saint John Paul II, offered de Lubac appointment to the College of Cardinals, this time with a dispensation from being consecrated a bishop. De Lubac accepted and became the first cardinal after 1962 who was not a bishop. In the consistory on February 2nd, 1983, John Paul II raised de Lubac to the College of Cardinals. He was 87 at the time, and he died in Paris in 1991. Another example, the list of periti, was a Belgian Dominican friar, alluded to in the last session, so now we meet him in detail, Edward Skilabex, Schillebecx. He was a professor of dogmatic theology at the Dominican Institute at Louvain, the University of Louvain. In 1958, he became professor of theology at the Catholic University of Nijmegen in the Netherlands. That's Nijmegen. He served as theological advisor to the Dutch bishops during the council. As such, he offered significant contributions to the conciliar debates on De Verbum, which is the document on Scripture, Lumen Gentium, and Gaudium et Spes. He was active, publishing theology until his death. He was investigated for possible heresy 3 different times, but his works were never officially condemned. He was born in Antwerp, the 6th of 14 children. Skilabex entered the Dominican order in 1934. He studied theology and philosophy at the Catholic University at Louvain, was ordained a priest in 1941. After World War II, he studied at the Dominican Study Center near Paris, where representatives of the New Theology movement, the Nouvelle Theologie, such as Xxiii and Congar. We're going to meet Xxiii in a minute. We've already met Congar. Introduced him to new trends in theology, as well as introduced him to the thought of Calvinist theologians, such as Karl Barth. In 1952, Skilabex defended and published his doctoral dissertation titled The Redeeming Economy of the Sacraments. After that, Skilabex became a master of the philosophy, the study house of the Dominicans. In Louvain. And in 1957, he spent 1 year teaching theology on the theology faculty at Catholic University at Louvain. Then in 1958, the Catholic University of Nijmegen in the Netherlands made him professor of theology as well as history of theology. His inaugural lecture was titled In Search of the Living God. It introduced Dutch theologians to the new theology of Xxiii, Congar, and von Balthasar, and others. Starting in 1961, Skilabex attended Vatican II with the Dutch bishops, such as Cardinal Bernard Jan Alfrink, but he was not officially peritus for any single bishop. He gave conferences on theological ressourcement, return to the sources, for many of the bishops in Rome. It was not, it was just informal for those who were interested. In this way, he influenced developments of several conciliar constitutions, such as De Verbum and Lumen Gentium. Concerning Lumen Gentium, the Constitution on the Church, Light to the Nations, Skilabex was mainly involved in the debate on the collegiality of bishops, attempting to move Catholic ecclesiology away from a purely hierarchical, structured vision of the Church, and instead which he saw focused too heavily on papal authority. And instead of focusing on that, he wanted the post-conciliar church to focus on collegiality of the bishops. In 1968, together with Xxiii, Congar, Karl Rahner, whom we've met, and another guy, Hans Kung, he was involved in preparing the rise of the new theological journal, Concilium, which was officially founded in 1965 and which promoted reformist thought. After the council, Skilabex continued publishing voluminously, and as I said, he was investigated 3 times for his orthodoxy, but never condemned. He died in 2009. on December 23rd. Okay. Congar, I've alluded to him, but let's see. Yves, Y-V-E-S, Congar, C-O-N-G-A-R, Dominican. He was a French Dominican. He was a student of Jacques Maritain. He attended retreats given by Dominican Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange. Was ordained a Dominican himself on June 25th, 1930. His specialty was ecclesiology, the theology of the church. In 1947, he was forbidden by the order to publish or teach, owing to questions regarding the orthodoxy of his writings on the hierarchy, the papacy, ecumenism, clericalism, and the laity in the church. In 1961, he was rehabilitated by Pope John XXIII and invited to the council. During the preparatory period, he was a consultor to the Preparatory Theological Commission. At the council, Congar was an official peritus, residing in the Belgian College in Rome. He later wrote a book titled My Journal of the Council, translated into English in 2012, which is a priceless historical resource. Named a cardinal by John Paul II in November of 1994, he died on June 22nd the following year after a long struggle with sclerosis and deterioration of his nervous system, which inhibited his mobility. Karl Rahner, alluded to him last time, so now we meet him. That's R-A-H-N-E-R. Born in Freiburg in the Duchy of Baden, Germany, B-A-D-E-N. He was the son of a college professor. He entered the Jesuit novitiate in 1922, 4 years after his older brother Hugo. Karl was ordained a priest on July 26, 1932. In 1934, he was sent to the University of Freiburg to study philosophy. There, he studied with Martin Heidegger. Rahner wrote his dissertation, later published as a book, Spirit in the World, which asserted that the human search for meaning was rooted in the unlimited horizon of God's own being, experienced within the world. Rahner's Catholic advisor, Martin Honecker, found his dissertation unacceptable and refused to approve it. Rahner moved to the Jesuit school in Innsbruck, where he completed a dissertation in theology in 1937. Rahner taught in Innsbruck from 1937 to 1939. At that point, the university was taken over by the Nazis. Rahner went to Vienna, where he spent the war years teaching and working as a pastor. In 1960, Rahner's Jesuit superiors placed him under pre-censorship, meaning that he could not publish again until some theological doubts about his works were resolved. Nevertheless, in 1962, Rahner was appointed as a peritus by John XXIII for the Second Vatican Council. Cardinal Koenig of Vienna selected Rahner as his private advisor on the council documents. During the council, Rahner worked with Joseph Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI, who at the time Ratzinger was a priest. He wasn't even a bishop yet, to prepare an alternate text on the issue of the relationship between Scripture and tradition in the Church's teaching. And that alternate schema was accepted by some of the German bishops. Now, later in life, Rahner and Ratzinger would disagree on the direction of some of Rahner's writings. Other topics discussed during Vatican II show that Rahner's influence included the sections on the divine inspiration of the Bible, the relationship of the Church to the modern world, the possibility of salvation outside of the Church, even for non-believers. After the council, he taught at the University of Munster in Germany until 1971, and then in Munich until 1981, then back to Innsbruck, where he died in 1984. Another Peritus alluded to earlier, now we meet him formally, Marie Dominic Chenu, Chenu. He was a self-identified progressive Roman Catholic theologian, one of the founders of the reformist journal Concilium. Born in France, traveled to Rome in 1914 to study at the future Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Angelicum. While at the Angelicum, Chenu was ordained a priest in 1919, completed his doctorate in theology in 1920 under the direction of Reginald Garrigou Lagrange, with a dissertation titled On Contemplation, which focused on the meaning of contemplation from a Thomist perspective, from the St. Thomas Aquinas, who also was a Dominican, 13th century Dominican. In 1920, Chenu was appointed professor of the history of dogma, and late in 1921 turned down a request from his doctoral supervisor, Garrigou Lagrange, to return to the Angelicum as a lecturer. He began to develop his theological perspective, replacing what was regarded as the non-historical approach to Thomism that he learned from Garrigou Lagrange at the Angelicum, replacing it with a historicist reading of Aquinas. At this school, at La Salchois, he was the teacher of Dominicans Yves Congar and Edward Skilabex. In 1942, his works were placed on the Index of Forbidden Books, whereupon he ceased publishing and became involved in the priest-worker movement, for which he was disciplined again, because the priest-worker movement was regarded by many in the hierarchy as being a front for communist infiltration. In 1962, Chenu was invited by Pope John XXIII to be a Peritus at Vatican II, where he was influential on the document Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution on the Church in the modern world. Another Peritus, an American, John Courtney Murray, Murray, was a member of the Jesuits, a Society of Jesus, American theologian. His area of interest was also ecclesiology, theology of the church. Born in New York City, entered the New York province of the Jesuits in 1920, ordained a priest in 1933, completed a doctorate in theology at Georgetown, 1937. In 1937, Murray became a professor of theology at the Jesuit School in Woodstock, Maryland. And in 1941, he was named editor of Theological Studies. That's the title of a journal, Theological Studies. In 1954, he was silenced. He was forbidden to publish, owing to doubts with regard to the orthodoxy of his positions on religious freedom, freedom of the press, separation of church and state, and the possibility of salvation outside of the church. Murray attended Vatican II as a Peritus to Cardinal Spellman of New York in 1963, where Murray made substantial contributions to the Declaration on Religious Freedom, to Gaudium et Spes, the Church in the Modern World, and Dignitatis Humanae, the Declaration on Religious Freedom. Murray died of a heart attack in 1967. All right, so those are some of the Periti, whose names, I went through that mostly for seminarians because these are names that you'll hear, and some of the works you may even have been assigned to read. So this is how they fit into the context. Okay, so back to the John's pontificate. In March of 1963, John XXIII established a papal commission on birth control. So the birth control pill came on the market in 1960. So it was new from their perspective. So how exactly this, and I mean, not only the pill, but just that idea that this was, like a medicine could be used to prevent conception, to prevent pregnancy. So how is the church going to respond to this? How is the magisterium of the church, meaning the teaching, how is the church going to teach the faithful about this? So stay tuned for that. It's going to reach fulfillment with the next pontificate. Before the next session of the council could begin, Pope John put out what turned out to be his last encyclical, Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth. Holy Thursday, April 11th, 1963. Consisting of 172 numbered sections. Now, as we saw, Pope John did not want condemnations at the council, but he did find something in the world to condemn himself. The central theme of this final encyclical was condemnation of the arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, condemning it for escalating tensions, making war more likely, and for consuming resources that he believed should more properly be directed to improving the common good. John placed the church above the conflict between ideologies while outlining criteria for any government to follow. In a couple of examples, in number 48, he offers a critique of totalitarian dictatorships. All right, totalitarian, that's a term you run across if you read about the period. It's a term that's derived from an Italian word meaning complete. So a totalitarian government is one that asserts and enforces complete control over all aspects of life. And so that's the mode. And so that can be either the extreme left or the extreme right. So, the Nazis, extreme right, as well as, the communists, the extreme left, would both assert that complete control. And dictatorships, of course, because they just, they're completely arbitrary in their power. So John addresses this, one example from number 48, quote, hence, a regime which governs solely or mainly by means of threats and intimidation or promises of reward provides men with no effective incentive to work for the common good. But since all men are equal in natural dignity, no man has the capacity to force internal compliance on another. All right, skipping down, number 49. Hence, representatives of the state have no power to bind men in conscience unless their own authority is tied to God's authority and is a participation in it. For the first time in Pacem in Terris, in a papal document, John distinguished between Marxist ideology, which was not acceptable for Catholics, and communist-governed societies, which he believed could have legitimate social aspirations that should be respected. Okay. From an excerpt from number 67, quote, for the rest, it is not possible to give a general ruling on the most suitable form of government. Number 159. It is perfectly legitimate to make a clear distinction between a false philosophy of the nature, origin, and purpose of men in the world and economic, social, and political undertakings, even when such undertakings draw their origin and inspiration from that philosophy. Besides, who can deny the possible existence of good and commendable elements in these undertakings? So this came out only 6 months after the Cuban Missile Crisis, October 8th through 28th, 1962. Once again, this appeared to validate the contempt that many conservatives felt for John the 23rd, ridiculing him for allowing himself to be used by the Soviets. Liberal-minded Catholics, progressive-minded Catholics, applauded Parchimentaris as an example of papal diplomacy, attempting to infuse a sense of calm in a world situation that was entirely too close to the trigger. So those two extreme views, this is just going to continue. It's in the council and after the council. In many ways, it's still with us. In many ways, the church is still divided in that way. And then it ended for him. On June 3rd, 1963, Pope John the 23rd died after a reign of 4 years and 8 months from complications resulting from stomach cancer. His stomach perforated. The cancer ate a hole, literally a hole in his stomach, and he became septic. I think then they called it peritonitis. Anyway, it was an internal infection and died. This required that the council be automatically suspended, since a council is only valid when functioning in union with the Pope. So it would be up to the next Pope whether to call it again or not. John the 23rd was beatified by John Paul II on September 3rd, 2000, in the same ceremony as Pius IX. John the 23rd was canonized by Pope Francis in the same ceremony as Pope John Paul II on April 17th, 2014. John would be followed as Pope 262 by Paul VI. So it is to Paul VI that we will turn our attention next time. For now, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.